To start off, let's work on a definition for PMP. What would you say, Christine, you can start since you're the main publisher here. What is a good definition for PMP? Why would an agency or an advertiser care?
Okay, I'm a huge fan of analogy. So the way I think about a PMP is a private party. So at a private party, you have a host, and you make a guest list, and you extend invitations to the people that you want to come to your home and spend time with you, and you open that invitation to them, and they are invited to come and participate in the party and take part in everything that you have on offer. However, anybody that you don't want in your home is not invited, and anyone who misbehaves while they're there is asked to leave. And that's really how I think about a PMP. Is a private marketplace where folks are invited to join and are expected to follow a certain code of conduct while they're there. And they know where they're coming. They know what more or less what they're going to get when they get there. It's a very transparent, very clear, very premium kind of experience. And that's what Bell Media offers. That's a sort of a premium publisher's approach to the programmatic space.
It's a great analogy, and I just want to clarify, I've never been invited to a party at Christie's. So.
Wait for it. You're on my list.
And of course, we're talking about inventory and media availability, right? So let's go to the gentleman from the exchanges. How would you talk? What's an open exchange? What is that?
Using the same analogy, I guess, maybe we'll talk about just an even larger party. And there's the guest list in a private marketplace. Maybe it's a handful of folks, so it's very small and intimate, if you will. The open market can consist of literally thousands and thousands of buyers. So the barrier to entry in the open marketplace would certainly not be as exclusive as, say, a private, which would be more invitation only based, like Christian mentioned. It's just a far more massive pool, I guess, if you will, of scale or supply that's available out there with far more participants. There are still rules that will have to govern sort of how those impressions are transacted upon and so on and so forth. But it's an ocean as opposed to say a backyard pool.
Just to reiterate, it's just all buyers, all publishers, but not all publishers will make their inventory available in the open market, but it does include, and you're invited to the party.
Okay, so let's talk about the two working together a little bit. So it's not an either or. I think, especially for us as the integrators that put all this inventory together, we can mix and match both for the same advertising campaign, for example. Going back to that, benefits to advertisers. Say I'm a small brand that wants to run a local campaign in a small city or extended area around the city. Would I choose an open exchange or would I choose a PMP for that? What questions would you ask me if I was coming to you and saying, I want this?
I think one of the questions might be, what is the budget that you're prepared to allocate towards this campaign? One of the things that might prevent you from doing a private marketplace, it could just be due to the fact that you don't have enough budget to maybe scale this with one specific publisher. Versus if you're looking at an open market scenario, now you've got the ability to pick and choose amongst hundreds of different supply sources that will have an audience that's isolated or dedicated to a specific region that you're ultimately looking to target. So that would be one of the questions I think I would probably ask first, depending on how much you're looking to allocate towards a model like that.
But I would actually argue that regardless of who the advertiser is, whether they're a small local advertiser with maybe not a lot of money to spend, or a massive, great advertiser with a huge budget to allocate, I think one of the key questions has to be, how concerned are you about the integrity of the inventory that you're buying? And one of the things that is a real advantage to a PMP is that you know exactly what is there, and there's full transparency as to what you're buying. So if you are concerned about where your ads are going to run, and to my mind, all marketers ought to be, If you're concerned, really, you should be concerned about the brand safety of your inventory. You should be concerned about the overall quality of the content of the inventory. You should be concerned about potential fraud within the environment. So all of those questions, because regardless of the amount of money that you have to spend, if the money is going to fraudulent inventory, then you're not getting your money's worth. So there's kind of, I think, a false economy that you can think about when you think, oh, well, open exchanges, aren't they so much cheaper? Well, perhaps, but once you once you shave off anything that may be not reaching a human, perhaps not. So I would say that you really kind of have to evaluate who it is that you think you're trying to reach, and what kind of environment you think you'd like your ads to be in for that.
Okay, so this is good. So we got price and quality. And the other last little piece of that triangle that we have is time. Now, forming a question on time is going to be hard, but do, for example, PMPs guarantee inventory?
No, they don't necessarily guarantee inventory. It's really up to how you want to transact across it, and I think that will open up another whole can of worms that I won't necessarily get into. But I think, if you're trying to reach a small audience, a small DMA or a small city, you're going to need a lot of scale. And in order to reach that scale, the market is a good place to start. It'll help you narrow down the type of audience, the type of sites that you want to buy, and that's where you can decide to then move into the private market, where you understand inventory, like Christy said, and you understand who you're buying, that sort of thing. So, but you got to get that base of where you need to buy your inventory, make sure there's enough scale that you can actually deliver. And that also gets down to the time. Can you actually deliver in time?
Right.
I know, but I worry a little bit that you create a fallacy of, if you need massive scale, you need to be in a huge ocean of inventory in order to get what you actually need. Most of the time, that may not be true. Given the budget that you have to allocate, you don't have unlimited inventory to spend against, and you ought to be selective about what you start with. Because if you are looking at a massive scale of inventory, but none of it's any good, then you're not looking at a massive scale of inventory. You really have to pare that back right away. So I just challenge that a little bit, that you do need to look, you're not looking at tiny little PMPs, you should be looking at partners that start with some scale, but you should also really be evaluating what that overall environment is and what that transparency looks like.
Great excitement.
And no, you're absolutely right. And I think that one thing to consider too is you don't necessarily need to go to the open market if you're having trouble scaling a certain audience or certain geo or something to that effect. I mean, the other option there is programmatically you can also reserve or guarantee inventory as well. So it doesn't need to necessarily be I can't find this in a private marketplace, so I have to go to the open. The traditional method of reserving inventory up front still can apply in a programmatic space as well.
All right, so a couple other questions about benefits. Ad fatigue. Let's say I'm in a really great property. Like say I'm on CTV. I got CTV playing. And I have users already seen 2 of my videos, one after the other, and I know that's it for that user. I can't show them another ad or they're going to just die. I hate that brand. Is it okay for me to find that user maybe in another app later on in the week and sell them that ad again or show them that ad again? Or do you think we should not combine the openness of the RTD exchanges with PMP? Should we usually stick in the walled garden as we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of 2 concepts that are being conflated in that question. I think you have to control your frequency, and I think smart marketers and smart agencies, and one of the advantages of programmatic is that you do have a lot of control over your reach and your frequency, and I think that's really one of the reasons why it has gained hold the way that it has at the Canadian marketplace, because that kind of control becomes a really useful tool for marketers. So I absolutely agree with you. You should be controlling that. And yeah, it's great that in a programmatic context you can control that over multiple publishers. You don't necessarily, though, need to be thinking about just private or just open or a combination of both. You could be doing all private marketplaces using multiple publishers and still achieving the kind of scale that you're looking for while still retaining the integrity of your supply chain. So, that may be a way for you to accomplish both of those objectives.
Right. So we now have this happy consumer. He's seen the ad twice. And a large brand, we have many large brands that we see at Addictive. And they care about quality all the time, but their numbers are so big, they buy so much mobile inventory that it's hard for us to not, slobber over that one person in the CTE app. We have to find other people in other apps. So when we look at that, I know we're speaking about the quality, it's very important, but sometimes budgets have to be spent, and we need to find, defendable inventory to run on. Sometimes those people are not in PMPs. They're not in very great apps. They're in poker apps, or they're standing in line in a bank, and they're texting somebody or chatting with somebody. The question is, if I'm a buyer, I'm an agency or a brand, what should my mix be? Should I worry about the audience I'm after, or should I let the sort of the middleman, the DSP decide where it's run and just prove that it's run on the properties that I want or the people that I want? What's a good way that a brand or an agency can come to us and say, I want this because I exactly know that I'm either looking for a human being at the other end of this, or I'm looking for properties to run on because my brand has to be associated with those properties. So what would be a good question that they could ask when they came to us?
So just to confirm, so you're looking at essentially one or the other. What am I giving it to my DSP, and here's my whitelist, and
right. So like if
this is exactly
how much input should they demand from us, for example, as a DSP, in terms of what the PMP mix would be, or how much of their focus should be on actually following the user in a user story across a number of apps, not just in a single PMP, to complete sort of some sort of sale in that process. Because if we only have, say, 1,000 people in a PMP a day, but we need 1 million impressions, we can follow those users around in other apps and hit the same ones, which we don't want to do because of frequency capping, but we can find new users outside of the PMP and fill the requirements of the brand. So the question is, if I'm a brand, how much input do I have with my DSP in asking for a certain allocation of PMP? Or how much should I just say, no, you guys just be transparent and you guys tell me what to do?
Sure. Well, I think it goes into what was being discussed on the previous panel. I mean, you have to trust your partner. You have to ultimately, these are the folks that are managing your budget. They're the ones that are controlling where your brand is ultimately visible. And so, I think that really comes down to the initial process of who you're going to select ultimately as your vendor of choice. Once you have that trust, I think it goes back to something that Dave was talking about off the hop, where why don't we A/B test it? It might not necessarily need to be an end-all or be-all solution one way or the other. I'm a big proponent of testing and just trying different things. This industry is changing so quickly and so rapidly. If we look at where it was even 6 months ago or a year ago, it's very different. I don't know what happened here. But I think that's really what it comes down to. I mean, I think you have to trust your vendor. You have to make a good selection there, but ultimately you've got to test a ton of different things. I think Matt had said they're testing 60 different vendors or something to that effect. So constantly doing that, I think, is what's going to move to the top.
And I agree with you. And I would also add to that it's an interesting concept, like budgets must be spent. Well, yes, they must be spent, but they must always be spent well, right? I mean, I think that is our responsibility as marketers or agencies with end clients. Every dollar matters because there's an opportunity cost to where that dollar might have been spent otherwise. And I think particularly in digital media, we have a responsibility to prove that we are an effective media. We believe that. And I think we've gotten into trouble with this in the past, particularly when open exchanges, when programmatic first kind of burst onto the scene, there was a lot of excitement about the potential that it held, but then we found out actually it was kind of a dangerous place, and the folks that kind of galloped into this great, amazing, blank space were like very quickly discovered, oh right, there's actually a lot of fraud, and not just a lot of fraud like, whoops, I kind of screwed up, but organized criminal activity that was designed to suck marketers' budgets out of their pockets and into the criminals' pockets. So nothing accidental about it. Very deliberate defrauding of our marketers. So as publishers, I think it's and as tech players, I think it's really important that we be careful with the budgets and that we make sure that when a dollar is spent, or maybe if a dollar can't be spent, then perhaps that needs to be returned. But there's lots of inventory. Like I wouldn't say that one of our biggest problems in digital media is a scarcity of inventory. It may just be that we need to be tactical or thoughtful about different ways to deploy those budgets. And I would also say that at the end of the day, you need to have transparency, and every marketer should demand that from their agency.
I would add that you got to trust your DSP, you got to trust your data partners, and the integrity of that data can be overlaid onto that inventory. So you have that level of trust as well. But what programmatic has done is create all these efficiencies, but it's like Naveed said, it's really separated the buyer and the seller. You need to be talking, the advertiser needs to be talking and understanding what they're actually buying at the end of the day. And that gives you that transparency. There's tons of inventory out there, you just have to be able to go understand it and go out there and get it. So a lot of creative deals can be put into place that can give you additional scale, but it's about talking to the seller at the end of the day, the actual publisher that owns and operates that inventory.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Just to kind of tie it all together, I mean, I think, to Chrissy's bang on, I think there became an over-reliance on automation, which kind of took us down this rabbit hole of fraud. And so, I think we're starting to see that needs to be reeled in as well. And ultimately, despite, all the machine learnings and how smart the computers are and things of that nature, it's still the human beings that ultimately drive this industry forward. And they're the ones that need to ask the smart questions and communicate with one another. Because if we just sort of set it and forget it, so to speak, I don't see that as a sound strategy.
All right, so let's talk about a few kind of concrete things that you guys see in your own practice. How much inventory is sold as PMP at Bell Media?
A lot. We work really closely with our agency partners and with our direct buyers, and we work with them both on a direct basis and on a private marketplace basis. Now, we were actually very late to programmatic at Bell Media. We waited a really long time until a lot of the questions around fraud had really settled, and we really understood what the space looked like before we launched it. And the demand for it at that point was very pent up, I will say. So the partners that we had been working with for many, many years were enthusiastic about this programmatic offering that we brought to market. And for them, to a large degree, it was about being able to use these tools that programmatic offered. And I'd go one step further and say that what we're also really seeing a lot of, and Brad mentioned it earlier, is the beginning of programmatic guarantees, and being able and really sort of saying, yeah, we love programmatic. There's so much value embedded in the interaction, but we also really love your inventory, and we'd like to combine those. So we'd like to really know exactly what we're buying, guaranteeing in advance. Price isn't really the crux of the issue. The crux of the issue is being able to obtain the inventory that we want, and then have the nice programmatic dashboards to measure that.
Next question for you guys. When did PMP start appearing on your exchanges?
Appearing. PMPs were native to our platform when we built it out. But I think that if you look at the Canadian market and when there was like this, I'll call it sort of an inflection point, if you will. I think it was in the fourth quarter of 2013. PMPs were still alive and well, but that's really when I think we started to take a lot of the learnings from south of the border and the challenges that they were facing around fraud and things of that nature. And there was an article written, I believe it was in Marketing Mag at the time. It was called "It's 2 a.m. Do you know where your campaigns are?" or something to that effect. And it was really interesting because going into the first quarter of the following year, we actually saw this trend, which is not too common, which was looking at just private marketplaces from Q4 of one year to Q1 the following year, we actually saw a pretty significant uptick in the level of spend. And for many folks in this room, going from Q4 to Q1, you usually don't see up and to the right. It's usually a pretty dark and gloomy time of year. And so I think that it was really at that time that the Canadian marketplace in general was really put on notice. And a lot of folks were starting to ask those questions, where are my dollars going? Where are my ads ultimately being seen? And I think that was really the catalyst for the private marketplace in this country, where now today, I mean, on Index, we see about 50% of the dollars transacted in Canada going to deal ID, which is pretty significant. And I think that really speaks to the Canadian market and how this market has really bought into this concept of that one-to-one buyer-seller transaction. It's just being transacted a different way now. It's being transacted programmatically as opposed to IO-based.
So about 50% of our 40 to 50% of our publishers' inventory is being transacted through deal IDs now, which is really great. When we launched our SSP, the infrastructure for private deals was already in place. However, we realized that we needed really people to help facilitate the process, which is why my team was actually created to help facilitate and educate buyers with what's available through private marketplaces for our publishers, and it's really created a lot of growth. We also created a product called Curated Marketplaces that's basically grouping together multiple deals to provide scale around specific segments of inventory through deal IDs. So you get one deal ID opposed to 10. And that growth has been massive for how we transact. Last year, we created that product in October. Now 80% of our private marketplace inventory is transacted through curated marketplaces now. So that's huge growth for how that market is going after moving forward.
Okay, I'm surprised it's 50-50, so. We're on 13 exchanges, so we listen and ask questions in meetings, and sometimes we're surprised to see 10% here. But 50-50 is quite impressive, I think. That really means there's an appetite for P&P. Now, one thing that we see on our platform is we constantly battle the opportunity to throw an impression on the person we want. So there's a limited amount of time that we can get that impression to the user, and sometimes we're not first on the list of bidders. So this goes back to maybe the way things are set up. P&Ps should exist before a open exchange. I guess that's sort of the guarantee in some ways, that it's a first look kind of thing, or a price that's guaranteed, or something in the cascade of being the next bidder on the chain. How often do you think that people that provide P&Ps for their properties will then sell remnant, unsold content that was pre-approved or pre-sold in an open exchange?
I think a lot of these P&Ps that are now negotiated are around specific segments of inventory, either with first-party data layered on from that publisher, specific placements that may not be exclusive to the open market, as well as additional targeting that may set it aside from the open market. That being said, it's just about managing those price expectations with that publisher. You can create those first look deals, and there are huge advantages to be able to see all that data ahead of the open market. But I think there is a little bit of overlap, which is to be expected, but it's just a matter of making sure you're getting that correct segment of inventory that you negotiate with that publisher.
Okay, so there's a chance that being a really cheap DSP, I could wait for a P&P to sell me some stuff for really cheap sometimes, right?
I think it's going to be hard for you to find that inventory, but I think it's up to the publisher to make sure they're setting their prices correctly so that doesn't happen a lot of times.
Okay. Would you guys like to maybe talk about some of the publishers or some of the properties that you currently have a P&P, and maybe somebody will step up to you and get a deal ID from you?
I hope many people already have them. I actually just wanted to speak a little bit to that last question. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's about precision. more than anything else. And I think one of the advantages of having specific deal IDs is you're able to segment the inventory or the data sets that allow you to really zero in on the right segment. And I think once you get into open exchanges, that precision is to some degree diffused. So if you know what you're looking for, then chances are you will have to pay a little bit more for it because it may be a very desirable impression. And so that's kind of, and again, that's kind of the balance that you have to manage.
Okay. The properties. What are you proud of? What are you so proud of?
One of the things I would say one of our most valuable assets, and what we have, what we've heard a lot about, had a lot of enthusiasm about, is our video inventory. So, you mentioned CTV. We also work with TSN, MTV, Much. There's a lot of great video inventory, and video. We talked about scarcity of all the pockets of inventory. Video is probably one of the most scarce, particularly when you come to French language video, which we also have a fair bit of. So. Programmatic guarantee is really coming into play when it comes to video inventory, where folks are really interested in being able to lay down those buys and know that they're able to secure that inventory, because if they don't and they wait just to purchase it even in the private marketplace, it may be gone. It may be secured by another buyer already.
Right.
But yeah, I'd say that's probably one of our most valuable assets.
Okay.
Well, I'm exchange, so.
What do you like? What do you like in terms of PNP? Anything you want to bring up that is really a great? I know that some bells stop.
What I like from the private market perspective, we kind of touched on this here already, but there are a few more bells and whistles, I guess, if you will, that can be leveraged from both the buy side, but also the supply side. I mean, we talked about carving out more custom inventory, or something that's maybe going to resonate more with a branding message that ultimately the buyer is looking to accomplish. One of the things that we haven't talked about much today, but this concept around viewability and things of that nature. That's something as well that through a private marketplace, publishers can carve out pools of inventory that align perhaps better with a publisher's viewability vendors' scoring system. So if I know, for example, that this inventory over here is going to do considerably better, we can carve that out and we can assign a deal ID towards it as well. But I think probably the thing that excites me the most about private marketplaces and programmatic in general is how we've seen it come pretty far from what was originally to monetize inventory that nobody wanted to buy or nobody bought up front or through the direct channel. So it was sort of it was kind of down here, and now we're looking at it in a different light where programmatic is being elevated, and to Christy's point, now we're talking about being able to reserve inventory and transact it through a guaranteed channel. And so it's come a long way from this in many cases, an afterthought years and years ago, to this is a massive part of any major media company's overall strategy. And I think that's probably what excites me the most about it.
Yes, so SpotX is a inventory management platform, so we're an ad server and an SSP. And I think to your point, I think it's really important to really understand the segments of inventory that you want ahead of time, whether it's high viewability, whether it's specific audiences, whether you focus on content rather than that specific person. All of those things come into consideration when you want to create a deal ID. And then we're able to help you group those together to create you a specific market that you can transact upon. We have a ton of great new publishers that are coming out, but I think that's a specific kind of question. You can come talk to me afterwards about it. I'll set you something about it.
And and the other thing I would just add is we talked a lot about inventory, but we haven't really talked that much about data. And I would say that the data layers are a really important part of this conversation as well. So not only accessing third-party data, which is to some degree pretty widely available and pretty much the same no matter where you go, but within PMPs and accessing certain publishers, you can also access proprietary data sets that you can only get through through working with them. So I'd say that's another really important piece.
Absolutely. Okay. So to summarize, and you guys can chime in and say, no, I did it wrong. So for advertisers and for brands, really the question is price my chief decider? If it's not, then I can go for the quality, the viewability, the anti-fraud capabilities of a PMP and actually decide on the audience that's consuming my media. If price is a big issue, maybe it's some blend of the two with transparency for what properties it was running. Am I okay so far? Yeah?
Again, I would just say, make sure that you figure out the price after you've taken out all the stuff that didn't reach a person.
Right.
It's really important, because I mean, I can remember back in the battle days where Frog was really kind of galloping along. I can remember being told, I'm buying impressions for 1 cent per thousand. And I thought, wow, that's kind of incredible, and indeed it was incredible, because it wasn't reaching a person at all, and to some degree you get what you pay for.
Right. Well, we hope at Addictive that we actually give you quality all the time. I think what we do from our point of view is we follow the rules. We want to buy the stuff that we buy ourselves, and we want to defend our choices with the right solution. So not so much what David was speaking of, where our algorithms are hard to explain. We actually do things so we can explain it to our advertisers and our brands. So just in conclusion, I want to thank you very much for being on the panel, and I know that anybody interested will run up to you right away. One thing I have a request from you is if we could later on meet and we could discuss how an agency or brand could actually deal with you and then hand over the deal ID to us so that we could finish the process.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much.